What makes a gathering a Fabrengen? Are there certain requirements? That's a very loaded question. It really is. It's a loaded question because Fabrengens, I guess you could say they've evolved over time, and not necessarily entirely in a good way. I think the most important thing to say about the word Fabrengen, that Fabrengen means a party. Fabrengen means to spend time together. Fabrengen means for people to get together and engage. And some would say take a totally useful hour and use it in a totally useless way, but that it's bonding and it brings people closer together could already be called a Fabrengen. Traditionally, by Fabrengens, people sat and they talked. They shared about themselves and their lives, the good and the bad, the gashmis and the ruchnias. They sang, they said l'chaim, and they shared. They loved each other. Reb Mendel Futterfass would always talk about the idea of good Bruderschaft, of Chassidim being together and sharing. He came from Russia, from a very dark world. And he was very bothered by the tendency of people to discuss a lot of nonsense and their aversion to talking about anything real. And his famous line, you should hit each other in the head with a bottle, but you should communicate. The people should share their pains, their struggles, and help each other. That's a theme of a Fabrengen. Now, I guess you could say that there are two types of Fabrengens in this aspect. One is when Fabrengen is friends sitting together, and another when there is an actual official leader of the Fabrengen, a Fabrenger, as it were, who's either a prominent person or a mashpia or a scholar or somebody older, or somebody who just has something to say, and people would come and listen to him. And I would argue that there's a bit of a difference between those two forms. In the first, friendship, brothership is very, very strongly emphasized. And in the latter, although Fabrengens always are about people being open and honest with one another, there's a focus on a message and a messenger, an inspiration. How do I say this? Fabrengens are incredibly serious events, even though they're incredibly human events. Because being human is quite serious, or very serious. In other words, Fabrengens have an intimacy and a warmth and a sense of closeness, and occasionally even an experience of joy. But they're very serious, they're very, very important, because they're the framework for conversations that must be had, whether they're amongst friends or teachers and students, that would not be had otherwise. You get together and you talk, and you listen, and you're heard. So even though Fabrengens have something basically casual about them, they're very earnest. They're really very, very important. The fear is that if Fabrengen can become a Moshe Leitz, it can become a waste of time. You just sit and talk and do what Americans do, avoid talking about anything important. In which case, the Fabrengen is being destroyed. And that's a real fear. And when the question is asked, what makes a gathering of Fabrengen, or the certain requirements, the answer is that the purpose of the Fabrengen has to be serious, the mood of the Fabrengen has to be casual. It's a strange combination, but it's a very necessary combination. When people sit around, especially young people, and they emote, they just let themselves go, even if there is a measure of friendship that takes place, it's very possible that the other elements become so excessive that it defeats the purpose. Fabrengens are earnest times. They're very, very serious times that people, you could say, wasting time, but engaged in an critically important exercise, which is sharing. The Rebbe created a new model of a Fabrengen. The Rebbe's personal Fabrengens were quite unique, very different, because they were Fabrengens with a Rebbe. And for the most part, there wasn't a dual sharing, there wasn't a mutual sharing. The Rebbe sat by himself and talked, said a lot of Divrei Torah,
spoke a lot of different Chassidus, spoke about practical things, inspirational things. Everything that Rebbe had to tell Hasidim and the world, he said during Fabrengens. He could say numerous talks, one after the next, where he would raise the issues that he needed to raise, both practical issues and philosophical issues, and then, of course, Torah issues. The Rebbe's Fabrengens are very unique and quite different than the traditional Fabrengen, even of the Rabbeim in earlier generation, whose Fabrengens were much more intimate and had a greater external appearance of being casual. This is a different model of a Fabrengen. It's a Fabrengen of a Rebbe. It's a Fabrengen because it's warm and it's joyous and it's inspired, but it's also very earnest and very, very serious. I think the ingredient necessary to have a Fabrengen is real people. I think the ingredient most destructive to a Fabrengen is people who are either not real or people who are afraid of being real, because they will sabotage it, intentionally and unintentionally. I think that occasionally Fabrengens go on for too long. Fabrengens need to end. Now, it's wonderful just to sit, but when people are exhausted, they're tired, and they just don't have energy to being substantive, it descends into frivolousness, it descends into gossip, it descends into destructive use of time. Fabrengens often occur late at night. My children call them DMCs, which is supposed to mean deep, meaningful conversations. And of course, my response is dumb, meaningless conversations, which is a terrible thing to say. But there needs to be a sense that if Fabrengens are important, they must be engaged in, they must be participated in, and they must end when they stop serving that purpose. And if Fabrengen people eat, if Fabrengen people drink, because it's meant to be a human and a casual event. But I think it's critical that the people that participate in the Fabrengen understand that this casual event is a very, very important thing. Now, in conclusion, one more point. The Rabbeim had the expression Hisvaduyois Peilois, which means Fabrengens that have actionable outcomes. Meaning you sit together, you discuss, and something practical and real emerges that you can do ritualistically, behaviorally, to become a better person, a better yid, a better chassid, a better shliach. And this is really the optimum Fabrengen, the ideal Fabrengen. We actually come away with something, not just that uplifts you and gives you focus and clarity and makes you feel supported, but actually has an action attached to it. And that should really be the ultimate goal of every Fabrengen. That in addition to the Fabrengen being warm and intimate and casual and serious, it should also have a sense that something practical has to emerge from this. I want to say that the fact is that the Rebbe held very, very highly of Fabrengens. When people complained that the children were bringing too much, or the Bachim were bringing too much, the Rebbe would say, if they should find out whether in Lubavitch they Fabrengen more or less. The Rebbe believed in Fabrengens. He saw the necessity of it. And really, most fundamentally, what is the Fabrengen? People sitting together. Really. Because in America, everybody acts. Everybody externally is incredibly social, but in fact, we're all living in islands of time. Nobody shares anything real and honest. We all hide our fears and our concerns and our worries. And it's not healthy, it's not good, it's not correct. And the Rebbe was a very strong believer that if people Fabrenged, good stuff would come out. And the Rebbe never failed to mention the need that the good stuff has to translate into something practical as well. So Fabrengens are important. They're very important, and they should be frequent. But people should remember that it's not just a party. It's a party with a purpose, a party with a point, a party with a distinct beginning and an end that translates into being a better person.